As we await the United States election results, one outcome we have seen this week is the United States' formal exit from the Paris Climate Change Agreement following President Trump's letter in 2017 requesting withdrawal of the U.S. from the Paris Agreement. In the context of the U.S. status as the world's biggest economy and highest greenhouse gases emitter per capita, this is a significant setback for the global effort to mitigate climate change and adapt the world's most vulnerable countries to the destructive and disruptive impacts of climate change. Well, joining us now to speak on the United States 2020 elections outcome, implications for the U.S. exit, and other multilateral environmental frameworks is a board member of the Climate Strategies UK and Nigeria country representative at World Council for Renewable Energy, Dr. STANLEY IJEOMA. Dr. STANLEY, glad to have you join us on the morning show.
Yeah.
Hello, Doctor. Can you hear me?
Can you hear us?
Good morning.
Good, fantastic.
Thank you for having
Good morning.
me.
You're welcome to the morning show.
Good. Let's start this way. With the disruptive and destructive impacts of climate change, one would like to know which countries are most vulnerable and which countries are the most culpable.
Thank you very much. Straight away, Africa has extreme exposure and high vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. And this is because of the fact that you have agriculture being the mainstay of most African economies. And you now have we don't have technologies in agriculture. And, you know, if you are going to have, if you're not going to have enough rain, or if you are going to have heat waves and all of that, you know, this will throw the whole, African countries, the whole continent into some kind of food insecurity. You know, so Africa is right there as one of the countries that are most vulnerable. Then you also have the least developed countries. Some countries like Tuvalu, Maldives, countries that are somehow below the sea level, and they are really at risk, grave risk of being overrun by water if we are going to have the glaciers melting in Antarctica, you know, and you are going to have sea level rise. So these countries are they lack the capacity. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the expertise. They don't have the requisite knowledge, and their economy is not resilient to be able to withstand these shocks. And of course, the countries that are historically responsible for this, we talk about the United States. We also talk about the European Union countries. These are the countries that are responsible for pumping tons, billions and billion tons of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and that's why we are having this problem.
Absolutely, and of course, a continent like Africa, and with specifics to Nigeria, you would notice that we have such extreme exposure and high vulnerability to the impact of climate change. So, focusing on us, what is the impact of this development on us right now?
On Nigeria, I mean, we are already seeing, you have in the south in Nigeria, you have coastal inundation as a result of sea level rise. In the middle belt, we're already seeing climate change-induced conflict because of the displacements, from the Lake Chad region. So you have the Lake Chad drying up. And now you have almost 30 to 40 million people in the four Lake Chad countries being displaced, being stripped of their livelihoods. And some of them are moving further up, down south, trying to look for grass and water for their livestock and for their cattle. And this is causing a lot of, a lot of conflict, especially in the Middle Belt region of Nigeria. So if we are going to really if we are going to really be able to build resilience, we need countries like the United States that are, historically responsible for this to be in that Paris Agreement. Already, the goal of the Paris Agreement, going by the analysis of the nationally determined contributions of countries, we are not on track to meet that goal. And even though the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Scientists, who advise the UN on climate change policy and governance, they said, they came up and said it's actually 1.5 degrees that we should be targeting. And now countries are now revising their nationally determined contributions to be able to ramp up ambition for us to see what we can do. So if a country like the United States is stepping out, that's a huge blow. And that's morally wrong. And it's also going to set back their economy, because it means that for President Trump, who actually withdrew the United States from there and trying to promote the United States as a co-country champion, so that will mean that they will lose out on the massive and manifold benefits that will come with clean tech innovation, electric vehicles, and all of that. So that will be an opportunity for China to take the lead, both in climate diplomacy and in reaping the benefits of the massive clean tech revolution happening.
All right. Well, I hope we get to, when we talk about commitment to the goals, each government sets how they are not meeting it. But you've raised up issues, and my first question, I'll ask that, and I'll ask you this. America, like you just said, exited the Paris Agreement. How much of a setback has this been to the efforts by world leaders to mitigate the effect of climate change on the environment or to the environment? That's one. Then the issues you raised, you talked about countries like Maldives, Tuvalu, not having the infrastructure, not having the knowledge, not having the skills, to withstand these shocks. And I'm wondering, how are they supposed to guess it? How is the world supposed to work to help them guess it? Because they're part of the global village.
Yes, I'll start from the second question. Countries like Tuvalu and Maldives and such other small countries, island countries that are very vulnerable. That's really the essence of the global climate change governance framework. The Paris Agreement recognized the role of adaptation in helping these countries to be able to adapt to the impacts of climate change. That is already happening. This thing is not really in the horizon, it's already happening. So, and knowing that the global climate governance framework, the Paris Agreement, is actually resting on a tripod of the United States, European Union, and China. China is, the bad boy that just entered, in the last 20 years, they have significant greenhouse gas emissions. So when you have these three countries, doing the heavy lifting, and that
Good.
And that is not really enough. And you have one of the countries pulling out, and that country is also responsible, for a significant chunk of the problem. And that's a massive, massive setback. And the United States is also losing a lot of influence and a lot of clout globally, because climate diplomacy would have also afforded them, the leverage to be able to wield their influence. If you're talking about the United States taking a lead on climate leadership, leading and driving this process, and they are, contributing to making countries, communities, because when we talk about the impacts of climate change, we're not really talking about countries and states. We're talking about, people, communities suffering as a result of these impacts that are threatening to strip away their livelihood. So if we have, for instance, the Green Climate Fund, and from that fund, we are going to have people come up with projects and programs that will be able to build resilience.
Speaking on that Green Climate Fund, for instance, that you were just talking about, We need to talk about that some more. Let's head out to a quick break. Stay with us. We'll be back with some more on The Morning Show. You're welcome back to The Morning Show here on Arise News. Now, we still have Dr. Stanley IJEOMA, and we have been talking about matters arising as a result of the U.S.'s departure from that Paris climate agreement. Now, just before we went on that quick break, you were talking about, the GCF, that is, of course, the climate fund that is available to developing countries to enable them partake in this climate change movement that we're looking towards. Now, let's keep talking about that and how this also affects, countries like Nigeria. How much of this fund is available? We know there's about $9.8 billion from different nations contributing to that fund, even if, the U.S. doesn't really partake in that. So how much of this is actually coming to some of these developing countries that you've mentioned, the Maldives, amongst others?
Yes, thank you for that question. It's actually an open fund, some kind of, if you can come up and meet up with the criteria for assessing that fund, you'll be able to assess it. So there are really no restrictions for developing countries to assess it. And that's why, it's very important that we are able to build our national capacity to be able to leverage such funds. A couple of them have come to some of those funds for some projects, some of them transnational projects, recently in the last 2 years have come to Nigeria, but that's not enough. We need to do more to be able to assess that. Away from the Green Climate Fund, there are also the European Union, China, and some other Western countries that have some kind of bilateral arrangements where they dedicate, the EU, for instance, have billions of euro dedicated for what they call the European Union Green Deal, and part of that will also come to Africa through the European Union Africa Partnership on Energy. So there are quite some a whole lot of these that are available. You also have institutional investors who are private and public sector funds that are divesting from fossil fuel, because that is even where most of the funds are. I know that at the World Council for Renewable Energy, we ran a global divestment campaign, which really targeted universities and pension funds in Europe and North America for them to begin to divest from fossil fuel industry. So some of these funds, they've divested them, and they are also looking for projects that will qualify to be able to, offtake those funds. So these opportunities are there, and countries like Nigeria can do more to benefit from them. Corporate organizations can also do more to benefit from there, and that's where the capacity building comes in. Subnational governments, again, the UN framework, like we saw during in the last couple of years when Donald Trump wrote to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that he wanted to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement. And some states in the U.S. Disagreed with him, and they came to the UN to say we are still in, and they came up, they came up with what they call the American pledge, the pledge of the American people, different from the American government. So you saw that dichotomy between the government and the people, going in different directions. So that's really also, the point I'm making here is that there is a window for subnational governments to engage with the UN. So state governments in Nigeria can also benefit from these funds. We've tried to, raise that awareness. We've tried to, engage them to be able, to see the opportunities there and leverage on those funds, to develop projects that are climate resilient here in Nigeria.
Yes, Doctor. Let me now come to the question I was talking about earlier, that of commitment. Countries are giving the leeway to set their own climate commitment, specifying how they should reduce emissions, and then timelines as to when to be able to achieve that. But despite all this, they seem not to be able to achieve set objectives. Would you then say the Paris Agreement is a failure? And is there a better way to go about this for them to be able to achieve desired objectives, saying that it's in their purview to set their timelines and how to reduce gas emissions?
I will say right away that the Paris Agreement, while it has not fulfilled, or it has not met, it is yet to meet expectations. I would say right away that it's not a failure. It's a success. When you look at it from the point of view of, how many years it has taken to get almost 196 countries
actually.
To agree. And these countries, sorry?
197.
Yeah, almost 200 countries, 197 countries to agree. And you will agree with me that, it took almost 23 years for this to happen. And the experience of Copenhagen in 2009, where people sat in Bonn, which is where you have the UNFCCC headquarters. That people sat in Bonn to allocate emission reduction quota to countries, and that didn't work. So the Copenhagen COP 15 in Copenhagen, where we expected in 2009 to have this agreement adopted, it collapsed because of mainly the cat and mouse game being played between China and the United States. The United States is saying the volume of emission that China is doing is releasing into the atmosphere. It will be unfair for them to be classified as a developing country. And China is saying, no, we don't have historical responsibility for this, even though currently, the quantum of our emission is very high, is very big. So how do we balance this? Now, after the failure of COP 15 in Copenhagen in 2009, the UN now, in their wisdom, now said, okay, every country should go look at their capabilities and where their economies are and all of that. Then let's have some kind of bottom-up approach to this framework. And that was what gave rise to the nationally determined contribution. For Nigeria, we pledged to reduce our emission by 20%, on our own without external help, and 45%, with external support. Even though we have not really, just like other countries, we have not really achieved that, or we haven't really done much to do that. But between 2015 and now, a lot of work has gone into laying the framework for this to happen, engaging from the work we did in the National Assembly to engage the legislators and, build the capacity of the National Assembly Committee on Climate Change to be able, to come up with that legislation, which is waiting for presidential assent now. So these are some of the preliminary work that we need to do. And you also know that we are supposed to be in Scotland, in Glasgow, this December, but because of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, that has been, postponed to 2021 November. So it's really, these are early days. For us here in Nigeria, we are just laying the framework for us to be able to meet up with these targets. And don't forget that Nigeria is one of the first African country to float a green bond, and that green bond was oversubscribed. So these are some of the innovative financial mechanisms. These are some of the climate action that we need to see. We need to see more of this. So I would say that the Paris Agreement is not a failure. It's a success if you are looking at 196, 197 countries coming together to adopt that in 2015, 6 years after the failure of the Copenhagen COP 15 in Denmark.
All right. Now, let's take a look at this from the perspective of the global fossil fuel industry. You mentioned that earlier. And I'm sure you're also aware that some Green Climate Fund partners actually criticized the fund as a result of the fact that it was funding fossil fuels. However, this industry is worth over $4 trillion. You know, it's a big one. So what exactly does this climate agreement mean for the global fossil fuel industry in general, and also petroleum-dependent countries like Nigeria, if you look at the GCF and the agreement in pari passu?
Yes, I mean, it's a dated industry. It's an industry that is on decline. You know, since 2015, if you look at the coal subsector of the fossil industry, you see that they already took a hit. From 2016, immediately the Paris Agreement was adopted. Most of the coal companies in Europe and North America, they have filed for bankruptcy. And of course, I talked about the divestment campaign we did with the World Council for Renewable Energy, where, you know, the fossil fuel, where they are getting the cheap funds they'll be using, you know, to explore oil and, you know, pump out, you know, damage our environment and degrade our environment, you know, the ecosystem. They don't have access to that again, you know, the way they used to. You know, most pension funds in Europe, they've, you know, put a timeline on when they are going to withdraw their money, and now those monies, of course, you can't have them sitting idly. You know, they are going to be deployed, you know, in Africa and, you know, the rest of the developing countries to help develop climate-resilient infrastructures that will help these economies to cope. And we're talking about, you know, renewable energy. We're talking about climate-proof bridges and roads. We're talking about climate-smart agriculture projects. You know, we're talking about capacity building. We're talking about clean technology transfer. You know, so it's quite a whole lot. Remember that this problem is something that is affected all sectors of the economy, because it's either you are contributing to the problem, or you are at the receiving end of the problem, or, you know, both ways.
All right,
so that's
Dr.
really it's happening with that. So the fossil fuel industry, of course, Nigeria will have to look at the oil mighty Saudi Arabia. They saw the handwriting on the wall and quickly, you know, diversified and spread the risk. Very key. You know, so the Saudi Aramco, the IPO, they sold the IPO, they came up with the IPO last year, and that tells you that when countries like Saudi Arabia are diversifying the economy, for the economy not to depend on.
Yeah, Doctor, because of time, let me try and get in this question so you can answer it briefly. So many things to talk about, but time. What's your assessment of Bloomberg's Beyond Carbon initiative, with a very bold vision that after this election, the next administration will inherit a country well on the way to full clean energy economy?
Yes, Michael Bloomberg, remember, he was the one that led I would call it the rebel against Donald Trump, and led, you know, the governor of California and the other states to the United Nations framework, to the UNFCCC, and say, we as the American people, if the American government, if they are walking away from this, the American people, they are in there. So he's doing a lot in that space. Joe Biden already pledged to commit $2 trillion, you know, to decarbonize the United States energy system. And that's, you know, that's what we want to see happening in the U.S. We also want to see Joe Biden, you know, do more in terms of contributing to the Green Climate Fund, and also, you know, release, make available resources, you know, bilaterally to support countries like Nigeria, to support countries in Africa to be able to, you know, build resilience against climate change.
Joe Biden definitely has a historic plan for the U.S.
Yeah, I couldn't bring in the topic of Joe Biden, but because of time. But
well, thanks a lot for joining us this morning on The Morning Show, Dr. STANLEY IJEOMA.